class. Each week, I'm going to be providing a quick recap of the two chapters that you are assigned to read. So, this recap is going to be very short and just go over the essential things that I think are most important. This does not mean that you should not read the information in your textbook. It is going to provide you with a lot more in depth, but this is just a simple recap of chapters 1 and 4. The first thing that they highlight in the chapter is the word verse. I want you to know that a verse is any composition in lines of more or less regular rhythm, often ending in rhymes. So basically, a verse is any group of lines. It doesn't have to be lines in a poem, it could be lines in a movie script, lines in an essay. Any group of lines is called a verse. So that brings us to what makes poetry poetry? If anything that is written in a line is considered a verse, what makes poetry different? Well, it appeals to the mind, it arouses feelings and emotions. Poetry often makes imaginative statements, and it includes plain prose sense. So it plays on sounds, images, rhythms, and figures of speech. So anything that you're reading that has lines and does all these other things, you can consider it to be poetry. How should you read a poem, which is something very important to this course? First, you should always just read the poem once straight through with no expression at all. Just plow through any words that you don't know or anything that you don't understand and just get through it. Once you do that, go back and read the poem a second time. This time, actually taking time to look up words that you don't know, trying to find meaning in the text. This is when you can really dwell on those difficult parts as long as you need to in order to really get the meaning. Then you can also go back and read the poem aloud. Reading things out loud is often very helpful, or having someone else read it out loud to you may help you to determine some more meaning that you weren't getting the first two times that you read it. Another thing to do to help you really gain meaning from the poem is to paraphrase it. And that just means putting it in your own words. When we paraphrase poetry, we do it line by line. So you would take the first line of the poem, put it in your own words, move to the second line, and so on and so forth. You will be expected to do this in an assignment this week. The theme and subject of the poem are also two things you want to keep in mind. These are separate things. The subject is the major topic of the poem, and that's usually like one or two words. Like, what is the main thing that this poem is focusing on? The theme, however, is what actually matters most in the poem. It's the message that the author, the poet, is trying to drive home. There are different types of poetry, and we are going to examine a lot of those types of poetry throughout this course. But in the first chapter, they mention lyric poetry, which is a short poem expressing thoughts and feelings of a single speaker. These are the poems that you see that are written in first person, usually using the word I. They can also be written in first person plural, and that means that they're using the word we. Narrative poetry usually relates a series of events or tells a story. Dramatic poetry presents the voice of an imaginary character. So think of dramatic poetry in terms of plays, films. It describes any verse written for the stage. So think monologues. And then didactic poetry is a poem written to state a message or teach a body of knowledge. And we'll get back to that a little later in the course. Chapter 4 focuses on the difference between denotation and connotation. Denotation is a meaning defined in the dictionary, versus connotation is the overtones or suggestions of additional meaning that the word gains from all the contexts in which we have met it in the past. For example, when we say the word house and home, we know that they pretty much mean the same thing. They're a structure. But the connotation of home makes you think of family. It makes you think of security, comfort, happiness. Whereas a house doesn't necessarily have that same connotation. Think about the words cheap versus affordable. Both of these words mean low priced, but cheap has a connotation of being lower quality, while affordable connotes something of quality that happens to be lower priced. So think of if someone called you cheap, that's usually negative because of the connotation, versus someone saying that you shop for affordable things, which has a more positive connotation. Another example are the words protest versus riot. Protest definitely has a more peaceful connotation, referring to something lawful, whereas a riot is often used to connote a violent gathering of people who may be breaking the law. These two words are also important for an assignment that you're going to be doing later on this week. And there was our chapter 1 and 4 recap.